What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another highly combustible reaction. We're jumping into something awesome. Why listen to a Mahler? We've definitely heard a few different Mahler pieces by now. I've been told that I'm getting them in little tiny bite-sized schnuggets. And I appreciate it. Shout out to Brian for the request. Inside the score, if you enjoyed the video, get over, show them all the love in the world. The link's inside of the description, or to pop up right at the end of the video. Let's go learn a little bit more about the man and his life and so on and so forth. See where the music comes from. Let's go.
Gustav Mahler wrote some of the most intense, powerful, and large-scale symphonies in all of music history. This moment from his second symphony is like experiencing the Big Bang, an explosion of incredible force that gives birth to a spring of new musical life. It's as though dawn is rising on a new world of musical thought. It was Mahler himself who said, "A symphony must be like the world. It must embrace everything." And if anyone could write a symphony of planetary proportions, it was Gustav Mahler. Throughout his...
We have heard some pretty intergalactic pieces, some pieces that just take me right out of the world, legitimately.
career, Mahler pushed all kinds of musical qualities to their max. Emotional expression, the length of his works, the massive size of his orchestras, the sheer loudness and quietness of his music, his use of tonality and dissonance, his motivicism, all these musical qualities were pushed towards their absolute limits. And yet, that's only a small part of the whole story. So I want to tell you why you should listen to Gustav Mahler and how his music could change your life. Let's start at the beginning.
You're gonna get me more excited about the man than I already am. Every single piece that we've heard has been mega. Just massive, massive musical pieces. Like, it's definitely not today's day and age of music.
The first symphony begins with the orchestra holding the note A over a range 7 octaves deep. It creates this bottomless well of sound, from which emerges birdsong and distant fanfares. And then finally, the dawn of spring. Mahler was born in 1860 in Czechia to a Jewish family. He actually enjoyed great success in life, not as a composer, but as a conductor. He was arguably one of the most prolific conductors of his time, and enjoyed a career of relative superstardom, holding major conducting posts in Prague, Leipzig, Budapest, Hamburg, Vienna, and in the final years of his life, New York City. It was maybe through his conducting that he learned to write for orchestra with this fresh, modern sound that we already hear in his first symphony.
I'm curious to know how many other conductors turned into composers. That's like, you're sitting there, you're reading it all day long, you're performing these masterpieces from other magicians, and one day the light just goes off and says, man, I could write something like that. You would definitely have the skill to do so at that point.
Here is the dawn of something new, a sonic soundscape which would have a huge influence over future composers. And yet, his childhood was not so glittering. He was the second of 14 children, but 8 of his siblings died in childhood. He grew up in a house rife with domestic abuse. One story, documented by Sigmund Freud, tells of how Mahler, unable to stand his parents' violent arguments, ran out into the streets, where he was confronted by noisy street groups, military bands, and performers playing silly nursery songs. Overwhelmed by the clashing of music and his high emotions, he fainted in the streets. We can often hear this psychological trauma in his music, how moments of high emotional intensity are suddenly interrupted by grotesque or vulgar outbursts of brass bands or street songs. Even in his first symphony, we can hear his inner conflict, the adult reflecting on his childhood. We hear an emotional strain of street song, suddenly cut off by Jewish klezmer music. And all of this underpinned by a grotesque, minor key version of a well-known nursery rhyme. But the extraordinary thing about Mahler's early symphonies is how they are not only music, they manage to express some kind of world philosophy, some way of looking at or experiencing the world. His second symphony is known as the Resurrection Symphony. This is one of his most popular works, and it often has a profound effect on people who listen to it. I've actually devoted a whole podcast episode to diving deep into this symphony, and I also talk about it in my free program on where to start with classical music. If there's one piece of Mahler you should definitely experience in your lifetime, it should be this one. And that's the thing. This music is meant to be experienced, not just overheard.
Yeah, I never just feel like I'm listening to a song. It's not that at all. It becomes like it takes over all your senses type experience. And that's what I love about all of these classical music journeys that we were going on. Because it's not something that I was accustomed to. It's not something that I grew up listening to. But it just certainly has an overwhelming impact now, and all the ones that we've reacted to, I've listened to multiple times. They're just, I don't know, it's meditation and therapy, and it just feels right for my whole being.
Mahler takes us on a journey from death in the first movement through to resurrection in the finale. The finale alone is devastatingly powerful. After some of the largest scale orchestral writing to have ever been composed, we hear the entry of a chorus, at first very hushed, with the words, "Rise again." Yes, you will rise again. What you have longed for is yours. And it goes on. Oh, believe, you were not born in vain. You have not lived and suffered for nothing. What has come into being must go. What is gone will rise again. With wings that I have gained, I shall rise. Over the course of 15 amazing minutes, the music and text increase in intensity until the final, astonishing climax. This is not simply a religious symphony. In fact, Mahler was a lifelong agnostic. This is a philosophical work, a way of experiencing the world, and it does need to be experienced for its incredible force of musical power, if for nothing else. The third symphony presents another philosophy where Mahler explores the hierarchy of existence, the world, humankind, and eternal love. The order of movements lays out this hierarchy from what the flowers in the meadow tell me to what the animals in the forest tell me, then what mankind tells me, what the angels tell me, and finally, perhaps most importantly for Mahler's philosophy, what love tells me. This symphony ends here, not with a bang, but with a beautiful, emotionally rich slow movement, an opportunity for deeper reflection into the nature of humankind and love. In 1895, Mahler's brother Otto committed suicide, an event which is said to have greatly affected Gustav's art and outlook on life. His fourth symphony, while smaller in scale, continues Mahler's meditations on life after death. The final movement, titled The Heavenly Life, explores a child's perspective on how heaven should be. However, there seems to be some naive irony in this music. We hear the child describe heaven, but we never quite feel that we belong within it. These first four symphonies are all programmatic. They all explore narratives or clear philosophical ideas. But although they are now loved by modern audiences, most of Mahler's music was not taken seriously in his lifetime. He wasn't recognized as a successful
horrible
composer. With mostly disastrous premieres and poor reviews, his music was often mocked, criticized, and belittled by audience members, other composers, and the press. His conducting career was also berated, partly because of his Jewish background. The anti-Semitic press would constantly harass him and make fun of him, with cartoons mocking his looks and gestures. This cultural anti-Semitism was such a problem that Mahler eventually converted to Catholicism in 1897 in order to secure a top job in Vienna, which he simply wouldn't have been allowed to take on as a Jew. Even there, after conversion, anti-Semitism followed him. The mayor of Vienna even said, "I myself decide who is a Jew and who isn't." And so, Mahler's life was filled with these inner conflicts. Conflicts which you can absolutely hear in his music if you listen closely. Was he a conductor or a composer? Jewish or Catholic? A progressive or a nostalgic? A city dweller or a country lover.
Does any of it matter though? Because it can take you through all of it. I don't know. I find it so crazy that someone who's had such a hard life, a rough upbringing, still has it within them to make this kind of beautiful thing and put it out into the world. Even though it does now, we understand that there is moments of that in there, but it might be just another route, another path, another outlet for people to just. Maybe nobody back then wanted to sit down and write a 3-minute long song because it didn't justify the feelings that they were having. So instead, they wrote 30, 40, 50-minute long songs. Like,
in spite of these challenges, there was a light of happiness around the corner. In 1901, Gustav met Alma Schindler, who was herself a talented musician and budding composer. He quickly fell in love with her and they engaged in a rapid courtship. And if I'm focusing a lot on Mahler's biography, it's because so much of Mahler's music is so personal, so introspective that understanding his life seems essential if we want to understand his music.
Now, after this video, it's going to be a whole different thing when you go listen to the music, because you'll be able to understand more of where it was coming from. You'll be able to understand why certain parts of it feel completely different to other parts.
After meeting Alma, Mahler soon composed his famous Adagietto, which was later included in his Fifth Symphony. He is said to have sent it to Alma as a letter of love, no words, just music, which he knew she would understand. Scored for just harp and strings, this music is famously beautiful, and yet it is not the same kind of love as his Third Symphony. There is something sad, something vulnerable, something deeply mature in this music. A kind of subdued but deep welling emotion, which is impossible to describe and yet so perfectly captured by Mahler, which is perhaps why it's become one of his most popular movements. Gustav and Alma married shortly afterwards in 1902, but Mahler insisted that there could only be one composer in the household and that her role would be to support him. Although Alma obliged, this demand set the foundations for a difficult relationship. The summer of 1903 was a happy one, spent in their lakeside cottage at the Wörthersee, Gustav, Alma, and their first daughter, Maria. Alma writes, "He often played with the child, dragging her all over, taking her in his arms, dancing and singing. He was so young back then and so unencumbered." And yet, Mahler would spend his mornings in his composing hut, working on two dark projects. The first was his Kindertotenlieder, songs on the death of children, settings of poetry by Friedrich Ruckert. Alma writes, "I cannot understand how one can sing about the death of children if half an hour before one has hugged and kissed those who are cheerful and healthy. For heaven's sake, don't tempt fate." The other project was his Sixth Symphony, which Mahler himself called the Tragic Symphony. He would play this music to Alma on the piano. In the third movement, he describes the arrhythmic playing of two children staggering through the sand. Horrible. These children's voices become more and more tragic, and at the end there is one little voice whimpering. And then in the final movement of the Tragic Symphony, we hear the downfall of the hero, signified by the giant strikes of a hammer. As Mahler says, this hero receives 3 blows from fate, the third of which fells him like a tree. After showing the music to Alma, she says, "We both cried. We felt so deeply what this music meant." Well, that symphony wouldn't be performed for another few years. And actually, these next few years were some of Mahler's happiest. In 1904, Gustav and Alma did have a second child, Anna Mahler. And that same year, he wrote his strange Seventh Symphony. And then in 1906, Gustav had an extraordinary summer of productivity. Every summer, he would go to his lake cottage for a few months and focus purely on composing. But this summer, he had a stroke of intense inspiration. A vision that struck me by lightning. I only had to write it down, as if it had been dictated to me. Within only a few weeks, Mahler composed one of the largest scale symphonies that has ever been written. His Eighth Symphony. This is a symphony for orchestra, organ, double chorus, children's chorus, 8 vocal soloists, plus a series of eclectic instruments. It quickly became known as the Symphony of 1,000, and that is no exaggeration.
I can totally see that name.
The premiere needed 858 singers and 171 instrumentalists. As Mahler described it, imagine that the universe begins to sound and ring out. These are no longer human voices, but rather planets and suns that are circling. The music is filled to the brim with incredible counterpoints, massive climaxes, beautiful melodies, and prayers of love. It is by far Mahler's most joyful symphony, and it's also another philosophical one. It's split into 2 movements. The first is set to a Latin prayer, Veni Creator Spiritus, and the second movement is set to the closing scenes of Goethe's Faust, where Faust is redeemed through love and through this idea of the eternal womanhood. What links this prayer and this text? The idea of a rejoicing kind of love, a love that can redeem mankind. It really is an extraordinary happy work which plays out on a universally large scale. If you ever get the chance to hear this live, then go. The 8th would also turn
If I ever get the chance to hear any of this live, then I'm gonna go.
out to be Mahler's
That's on my bucket list.
most successful work, at least in his lifetime. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. In the same year that he wrote his 8th, the tragic 6th Symphony finally received its premiere. That solemn work with its wailing children and 3 blows of fate. And this first performance affected Mahler like none other. After conducting the performance, he was left totally shocked, sobbing, wringing his hands, and not in control of himself. No work, according to Alma, had touched him so much at the first hearing. And then, as if by prophetic fate, within one single summer, Mahler suffered 3 hammer blows to his own life. In the summer of 1907, he was driven out of his dream job in Vienna due to a hate campaign against him. Shortly afterwards, his 2 daughters became seriously ill with scarlet fever and diphtheria. After battling with this for 2 weeks, Maria, his eldest daughter, died from her sickness. Mahler's dark songs were coming true. And then, almost immediately after this, Mahler discovered that his heart was defective, with a condition that Alma called a virtual death sentence, the final hammer blow which would fell Mahler like a tree. This was a sea change in Mahler's life, the beginning of the end. Mahler began to work on a 9th symphony, except superstition had now crept into his life in a very real way. He started to believe in what he called the curse of the 9th. He noticed that many of the greatest symphonists since Beethoven had never made it past their 9th symphony. Beethoven, Schubert, Bruckner, Dvorak, all had died after their 9th symphonies. And so, instead of writing a real 9th symphony, Gustav tried to trick fate by creating a ghost symphony, a symphonic song cycle set to texts based on ancient Chinese poetry called Das Lied von der Erde, the Song of the Earth. Even here, though, Mahler's thoughts were clearly troubled. He set songs such as the drinking song of Earth's sorrow, the solitary one in autumn, and the final song, Der Abschied, the farewell. We can see how Gustav might have resonated with this text. Fortune was not kind to me in this world. Where do I go? I go. I wander in the mountains. I seek peace for my lonely heart. Mahler spent these late years wandering himself, with disparate conducting work between Europe and the United States. And in this period of wandering, he finally set to work on his real 9th symphony. This 9th has become recognized as a farewell to all that he had loved, and a farewell to the world. It's a farewell to his own life, but also to
I feel like he just, we need a whole movie about his life.
Music. The first movement starts with a strange rhythm, the palpitations of a faltering heart, and then a tender melody. Leonard Bernstein calls this movement a farewell to tonality, a reluctant letting go of the old Austrian way of music. And when you listen to this symphony, it's almost as if Mahler knew that this was the end of the line. Not only the end of his own life, but that he was the last of a Germanic symphonic lineage, one that had begun with Haydn and Mozart. It was the end of the Romantics, and it was also the end of Austria, or at least Austria as he knew it. Within a few years, Europe would pass a point of no return, and the world that Mahler knew would die with it. The final movement of the ninth is particularly personal. As Bernstein says, Mahler ties things up not in a pretty bow, but in a fearful knot made out of his own nerves and sinews. We hear prayers, chorales, hymn tunes, and folk songs. The music rises in intense prayer, hoping desperately, but this prayer is given no answer. Instead, these desperate pleas are followed by moments of quiet, Zen-like acceptance. One lone man staring into the void of his own mortality. Mahler reaches out again with desperate intensity, but the music fails. It fades away at a terrifyingly slow pace, dying slowly into nothingness. And then silence. It is finished. As Bernstein says, never has music come so close to death. And yet, Mahler still had some strength left. In spite of his weakening heart, he continued to conduct concerts in Europe and New York, although his first season with the New York Philharmonic was a financial failure. And then, just before the premiere of his 8th symphony, the one great symphonic success of his lifetime, Mahler discovered that his wife, Alma, was having an affair with a young architect, Walter Gropius.
When it rains, it pours. This man has been through the damn ringer. Anything that could go wrong did go wrong.
Was devastated, but he continued to work.
Wait, what did he say?
That his wife, Alma, was having an affair with a young architect, Walter Gropius. Mahler was devastated, but he continued to work. Now on a 10th symphony, another intensely personal work. The first movement culminates in these chords of white-hot pain. And across the manuscript, he wrote the words, "You alone know what it means. Farewell, farewell, farewell. To live for you, to die for you. Almschi." Mahler was unable to complete that symphony. For him, the curse of the ninth was real, a barrier beyond which he could not pass without losing his life. He died in May 1911 in Vienna from a disease related to his heart. While his music enjoyed some performances after his death, it was banned during the Nazi era and fell into relative neglect. It's thanks to the efforts of conductors such as Bernstein, Barbaroli, and Stokowski that we are more familiar with Mahler today, and that he now regularly fills concert halls. As Mahler said, "Would that I could perform my symphonies for the first time 50 years after my death. Perhaps then they would be popular and beloved." This is yet another Mahlerian prophecy that thankfully has come true.
Listen, I don't think I've heard a more passionate person when speaking about music than I have the narrator of this video. Get over and show Inside the Score all the love in the world. Obviously, like a true lover of music, just does the research too. Just it's crazy. I never knew any of that about Mahler. We've listened to a few pieces of the music, but this puts a whole new perspective on everything. That was heartbreaking. All of the things that he went through, and then you don't even really get to see how much your music is appreciated by the end. The Curse of the Ninth is terrifying. That made my hair stand up. Just, I don't know, that's bizarre. Get over, show Inside the Score all the love in the world. Obviously, go listen to some Mahler yourself. I'm telling you, it's really out of this world. There's no other way to explain it. Hit the like button if you liked it, the dislike button, but it won't believe you at all. Shout out again to Brian for the request. Tell the next one of my other Combustible, you guys be happy, healthy, safe. I love you to the moon and back. Peace.